For people, one goal: to deceive Marmush. Lydia, Chloe, Ashley, and Catherine, each of them trying to achieve their own. But who will really win in this brutal game? Betrayal and manipulation. Is everything going as planned, or not? What is each woman's role, and what does Marmush truly want? Secrets kept until the very last minute. Who will emerge victorious? Find out at the end. "I never thought this day would come," murmured Marmush, staring at the photo on his phone. His hands were trembling. How could you? On the screen, Lydia. Her smile was so familiar and warm. But she was holding hands with another man. A man Marmush hadn't seen in years. His ex-wife, she was there too. And suddenly, everything made sense. How did it come to this? Just a year ago, Marmush thought his life had finally come together. He had returned to his hometown after a divorce, ready to start fresh. Loneliness didn't seem like a problem anymore. He focused on work, opened a small business, and spent his evenings with books and memories. Then he met Lydia. She had always been somewhere nearby since school. A quiet, smiling girl who looked at him as if she saw more than just a classmate. Back then, he hadn't paid attention. But the years had changed everything. They met by chance, or maybe it wasn't chance, at an old friend's party. An evening filled with laughter, memories, and alcohol. Everything happened fast. "Remember how we used to dream about running away from here together?" Lydia laughed, pouring him another glass of wine. "Me? I doubt I thought about anything more than baseball and beer back then," he joked. She looked at him with that same gaze, tender, soft, fascinated. The morning was different. A pounding headache, the smell of cheap alcohol, and a wedding ring on his finger. "What's this?" Marmush stared at his hand, his heart racing. Lydia sat next to him on the bed, wrapped in a blanket, her smile wide and steady. "We got married," she said, like it was the most ordinary thing. "What?" "It was your idea. You said it would be a new beginning." His head throbbed. He tried to remember the previous night. Alcohol. Laughter. A walk to a nightclub. Then, a wedding chapel. Words spoken in drunken haze. Why not? He had planned to annul the marriage. But Lydia convinced him to give them a chance. "Maybe it's a sign," she whispered. "I've been waiting for this moment since 5th grade." Her words struck a strange chord in him. Maybe it was worth a try? The first months were amazing. Lydia was caring and attentive. She cooked him breakfast, left sweet notes, and talked about her plans and dreams. It felt like life had given him a second chance. But then everything changed. At first, it was small things. Lydia started coming home late, saying she was out with friends. She brushed off his questions, laughed, and told him he was too suspicious. Then there were other things. "Hey, Marmush, I need a little money. I want to take a style course. It'll help me get a better job." Of course. The courses. Then business investments that, according to her, would open new opportunities for them. After that, a trip with friends to the coast. Money slipped from his account like sand through fingers. He tried to believe. Tried to convince himself that she was just finding herself. But every night, when he woke up and saw the light of her phone glowing in the dark, something inside him tightened. "Who are you texting?" he finally asked one night. "It's just the girls." "Are you jealous again?" Her eyes gleamed with a challenge. Marmush nodded, pretending to be satisfied with the answer. But inside, he was boiling. That night, he took a step he never imagined he would. He dialed the number of the detective agency. "I need some help." "What exactly are you interested in?" "Surveillance. On my wife. Give us a few days." A week passed. Marmush came home from work when he received a message. "We found something. I think you'd better see this in person." His heart skipped a beat. He rushed to the detective's office. The man with a serious expression handed him an envelope. "This video was recorded yesterday. We followed Lydia, as you asked." Marmush opened the file on the screen. The first thing he saw was Lydia's smiling face. She was leaving a cafe. Not alone. A man walked beside her. Tall, athletic build. They were talking, laughing, then stopped. Lydia casually placed her hand on his shoulder. "That's not all," the detective added. "Keep watching." The scene changed. The same man opened the door to an apartment. Lydia stepped inside. He followed her. Marmush watched silently. His heartbeat grew louder. And then the final frame. A photo hung on the apartment wall. The face was familiar. His ex-wife. Marmush clenched his fists. "No, this can't be." The detective merely shrugged. "You wanted the truth. Here it is." Marmush turned his gaze away from the screen. His head spun with thoughts. His ex-wife. Lydia. The same man. What connected them? How were they linked? And then, a thought struck him. An idea that would make them both regret every choice they'd made. They're playing their game. It's time to play mine. But they don't know I've already started. You'll never guess who just left her apartment. The detective's voice was tense. It's someone you definitely wouldn't expect. Marmush froze. He stared at the blinking message on his phone. His stomach twisted. He knew he'd get answers today, but he wasn't ready. Who was this man? And why did the detective sound like that? You'd better come. I think you need to see this for yourself. 3 days had passed since he saw Lydia in that apartment with the stranger. 3 sleepless nights, watching the video over and over. Who was that man? What was he doing in that apartment? Lydia acted like nothing had happened. She sat at breakfast, scrolling through her phone. How was your night? He asked, trying to sound casual. Nothing special. Just hung out with the girls, she replied without even looking up. Her voice sounded normal, but now he knew. It was a lie. Every word, every move seemed fake. With the girls? He repeated, glancing briefly at her phone. Which one of them drives a car with tinted windows? Lydia froze for a moment, but quickly regained her composure. Just a friend who gave me a ride. What's the big deal? Really? Marmush took a sip of coffee, feeling the boiling rage inside. He wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. Today, the detective promised to reveal the most important detail. Marmush arrived at the small office on the outskirts of the city. The detective was already there, watching footage on his computer. These are the latest recordings, he said. She met with him again this morning. With who? Marmush's voice was cold. See for yourself. The screen came to life. Lydia stepped out of a cafe. She looked happy, even in love. Then he appeared. Marmush felt a chill inside. No, he exhaled. The man who approached Lydia and hugged her was familiar. Too familiar. Is that Alex? Yes, the detective confirmed. And it seems they've known each other for years. Alex, Marmush's former best friend. And worst of all, the ex-husband of his first wife. But what is he doing here? Marmush whispered, unable to believe his eyes. In the video, Lydia and Alex were laughing, holding hands. Then they got into a car and drove off. That's not all, the detective added. We followed them. And you need to see where they went. The footage changed. Alex's car stopped in front of a large house on the outskirts of the city. The door opened, and there she was. Damn it. Marmush stood up, nearly knocking over his chair. It's her. His ex-wife. Chloe. His head throbbed with thoughts. Alex. Lydia. Chloe. How is all this connected? Why were all 3 together? He stood in the middle of his apartment, phone in hand. His hands were trembling. 3 people from his past. 3 betrayals. But what hurt the most was that Lydia had been pretending. She knew how hard his divorce from Chloe had been. She knew how difficult it was for him to trust again. Yet, she played her role. Had this been the plan from the start? Marmush sank into the couch. His breathing grew faster. He had been betrayed. Again. But this time, he wasn't going to sit back and do nothing. All right, he said aloud. If they want to play games, it's time to play by my rules. The first step was Lydia. Honey, I have a suggestion. Lydia stood in the doorway, her voice sweet, but now Marmush could hear the false notes in it. Let's get away for the weekend? We need some time for ourselves. Great idea, he replied, forcing a smile. I even know the perfect place. Really? Yes. And let's invite some friends. I want to throw a little party. Lydia hesitated for a moment, but quickly regained her composure. Of course, why not? Marmush watched her leave, and the plan was already taking shape in his mind. The party was set to take place at a country house he rented specifically for the occasion. He invited everyone, Alex, Chloe, and of course, Lydia. This will be a night they'll never forget. He smiled at his reflection in the mirror. But the most important part would come at the end of the evening, something that would turn all of their lives upside down. You want to play games? Marmush whispered. Let's see who laughs last. The door to the house swung open. Alex and Chloe were the first to arrive. They looked confident, even smug. Lydia stood beside them, smiling as always. Marmush greeted them with open arms. To old times, friends. He knew what would happen next. Their masks would soon fall. All he needed was a little more time. Are you sure you want to see this? The detective's voice echoed in Marmush's ears, cold and serious. Because after this, there's no turning back. Marmush stood in front of a closed hotel room door. Muted voices and laughter seeped through the thin walls. One voice he recognized instantly, Lydia's. But the other, he couldn't believe it. It was Alex. How did it come to this? The party he hosted seemed perfect. Laughter, music, glasses of wine, and fake smiles. Lydia was glowing, Alex was joking, and Chloe, his ex, kept throwing barely noticeable glances at him. Marmush appeared calm, but inside, everything was boiling. They didn't know that this time, he was the one in control. When everyone gathered in the living room, Marmush raised his glass and announced, "I want to thank you all for being here tonight. This evening means a lot to me. But the most interesting part is still ahead. Let's have some fun. A game of truth or dare. Just like old times." Lydia laughed louder than anyone else. "Oh, you're such a romantic. I remember how you used to hate these games. Back then, I didn't know what it meant to truly play," he replied with a smile. The game continued. At first, it was all harmless. Confessions about high school crushes, silly jokes. But Marmush was waiting for the right moment. And it came. "Lydia, truth or dare?" he asked, keeping his gaze fixed on her face. She smiled playfully. "Of course, truth. Is there something in your life you're hiding from me?" A second of silence. Just 1 second, and that was enough. Her smile faded slightly. She threw a quick glance at Alex, but he remained indifferent. "No," she said, lifting her glass to her lips. "You know I'm always honest." "A lie." Marmush smiled. She had no idea the game was already being played by his rules. Later, when the party shifted into a more relaxed atmosphere, Lydia and Alex disappeared. Chloe sat next to Marmush, sipping wine and shrugging. "They're oddly close, aren't they?" Marmush turned his head toward her. "And that doesn't surprise you?" Chloe just smiled. "After everything that happened between us, it's hard to surprise me. But you need to face the truth." Those words echoed in his mind as he left the house and drove to the hotel, the place where the detective had led him. Here it was, the hallway. Silence, broken only by the occasional voices behind closed doors. "Are you ready?" the detective asked, looking at him. Marmush didn't answer. He simply placed his hand on the door handle, took a deep breath, opened it. Light from the hallway filled the room. Marmush stepped inside and saw her. Lydia. Her hair was down. She was laughing, standing by the table. Alex was visible on the other side of the room, sitting on the sofa. His unbuttoned shirt revealed his chest. But what Marmush saw next made him freeze. On the table stood a bottle of wine. Next to it, a folder with documents. He recognized it instantly. It was the same set of papers he had signed a few months ago, the investment contract Lydia had convinced him to complete. "If he signs the second part, everything will be ours," Lydia said, smiling at Alex. "And he won't even realize what he's lost," Alex replied, winking at her. Marmush felt the ground slip from beneath him. This wasn't just about love. They wanted everything. His business, his money, his life. Lydia raised her glass. "To us. And to the fact that he'll never know the truth." She took a sip, and at that exact moment, Marmush stepped into the room. The silence was deafening. Lydia, seeing him, nearly dropped her glass. "Marmush, what are you doing here?" Alex stood up, trying to pretend nothing had happened. "Bro, it's not what you think." "Bro." Marmush's voice was barely audible. "You still dare to call me that?" He slowly approached the table and placed his hand on the folder with the documents. "I thought you loved me," he said, looking at Lydia. "Did you?" Lydia tried to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. Was it all an act? Part of some plan? Marmush's voice cracked. "First Chloe, now you?" Alex took a step forward. "Listen, we can explain everything." "Explain?" Marmush turned to him sharply. "You steal my money, my business, and then you explain." Lydia stepped closer, her hands trembling. "Marmush, it's just a misunderstanding. I love you." Marmush laughed. "Love me?" He pulled his phone out of his pocket and hit the play button. Their voices echoed from the speaker. "Once he signs the second part, everything will be ours. And he won't even realize what he's lost." Lydia and Alex's faces turned pale. You recorded us?" "Yes," Marmush replied coldly. "And now this story will end my way." He stepped back toward the door. "See you at the contract signing. I hope you show up." The door closed behind him with a dull thud. But they still didn't know the biggest surprise he had prepared for them. Marmush walked through the cold, dimly lit hallway, one thought pulsing in his mind. They wanted everything, and they almost got it. The phone with the recording, a solid piece of evidence of their betrayal and lies, felt heavy in his pocket. But something about the situation didn't sit right. Lydia had been too confident lately, as if she was always one step ahead. Alex, too. Could they have been so careless to let him catch them this easily? These questions circled his mind as he pulled out his car keys. Suddenly, his phone rang. The name on the screen made him freeze. Chloe, his ex-wife, who had seemingly stumbled into the center of this chaos. This can't be a coincidence, Marmush thought. Reluctantly, he pressed the green button. Hello. Her voice was calm, almost indifferent. We need to meet. Urgently. Really? After everything? His voice dripped with sarcasm. If you want to know the whole truth, you'll come, she said shortly and hung up. Marmush hesitated for a moment, torn between anger and curiosity. The whole truth? Gripping the steering wheel tightly, he stepped on the gas. The meeting place surprised him, an old restaurant where he and Chloe had once celebrated their wedding anniversary. The hall was empty, except for Chloe sitting at a distant table, lazily twirling car keys. When he approached, she looked up at him, the same gaze that once made his heart race. Take a seat, Mr. Marmush, she smiled with a cold expression. Cut the theater, Chloe. Why am I here? He snapped. I think you should know. This was all planned, she said, almost indifferently. I figured as much. You, Alex, and Lydia, a great team. No. She shook her head. You don't get it. Lydia didn't just randomly appear in your life. She's my younger sister. Marmush froze. What? Yes. And she always got what she wanted. You were my husband, but she wanted you since high school. After we divorced, she knew it was her chance. But do you know the strangest part? Chloe leaned forward. She never loved you. For her, it was just a game. Her words hit Marmush like a hammer, shattering everything he tried to believe in. Lies, he rasped. Oh, really? Chloe pulled out her phone and played a video. On the screen, Lydia sat in a living room, laughing with Alex. He's so naive. Always was. Thinks I loved him in high school? It was you I wanted. Always you. But I knew, if I wanted the money, I'd have to play the loving wife first. And then? Alex's voice asked. Then? Lydia smirked. Then he'll sign everything we need. And after that, we'll finally be together. The recording ended. Marmush stared into the void. His heart pounded so loudly it felt like it would break through his chest. They together? He barely whispered. For a long time. From the very beginning, Chloe replied. But that's not all. She tossed another folder onto the table. These are the documents for your business. Guess what? They've already been transferred to a shell company. And the owner of that company? Alex. Marmush flipped through the pages, feeling a chill creep into his bones. Signatures. His signatures. But he couldn't recall ever signing these papers. Any idea when this happened? Chloe asked, locking eyes with him. Remember that party? The truth or dare game. While you were distracted, Lydia slipped you the documents. You signed them, thinking they were just some boring travel forms she mentioned. Marmush remembered. A signature. A few pages. He hadn't even looked. He trusted her. Is that all? He asked, as anger slowly replaced despair. No, Chloe smiled. I want to help you. Why? Because they betrayed me too. Alex promised everything would be ours. But I was just a temporary tool. So you want revenge? No, she leaned closer. We want to win. The next day, Marmush sat in his apartment, reviewing the plan he and Chloe had put together. Everything would happen at the official signing of the final documents, where Alex and Lydia planned to secure full ownership of the business. If everything goes according to plan, Marmush thought, closing his laptop, they won't even realize what hit them. The office room was filled with tension. Alex, dressed in an expensive suit, sat next to Lydia, who was glowing in an elegant dress. Marmush seemed calm. So, Marmush, Alex smiled. Time to put the final signature. Marmush slowly flipped through the documents, stopping at the required page. Are you sure you want this? He asked coldly. Lydia smirked mockingly. Yes, darling. It's the best for everyone. Marmush took the pen and signed. A solemn silence filled the room. Alex and Lydia exchanged victorious glances. That's it, Alex said. Now everything is ours. At that moment, the office door opened, and Chloe walked in. Congratulations on the deal, she said. But there's a little detail. Lydia turned pale. What are you doing here? Chloe lifted one page of the contract. You forgot to read the fine print. According to this clause, in the case of transferring ownership to third parties, all assets automatically go to the primary investor. She threw another sheet onto the table, who, according to the latest amendments, is Marmush. Lydia and Alex stared at the documents in disbelief. No, this can't be. Marmush smiled, leaning back in his chair. The game is over. And I won. Lydia grabbed the documents, flipping through them in panic. This is fake. Oh no. Chloe looked at her coldly. It's an officially registered contract. You tried to trick him, but he outplayed both of you. Alex collapsed into his chair, holding his head. Marmush stood up, looking down at them. You thought you planned everything and won. But you should have remembered one thing. I learned from my mistakes. And this time, I didn't lose. He walked to the door without looking back. Enjoy your life together. Without money. Without business. Without me. The door closed, leaving them in silence, broken, deceived, and defeated. Marmush stepped out of the office building, inhaling the fresh air. For the first time in a long while, his chest felt light. Behind him was a room filled with betrayal, lies, and fake smiles. He could hear Lydia yelling at Alex, torn between rage and despair. Alex, who always thought he was the smartest player, sat with his head down, utterly shattered. But Marmush didn't look back. His plan had worked perfectly. They thought they had outsmarted him, but they had walked into his trap. The business was his again, and all their attempts to get rich at his expense had failed. Yet, despite the victory, Marmush felt a strange unease. Something wouldn't let him rest. He stopped by his car and took out his phone. A message from Chloe flashed on the screen. Meet me where it all started. We need to finish this. Marmush sighed nervously. Meeting with Chloe was the last part of the plan. Without her help, he could never have pulled it off. But why did she choose that place? The abandoned park near the old school. Once, he and Chloe used to walk there, dreaming about the future. That was when he still believed in people's honesty. When love seemed simple. But now, everything felt different. The silence reminded him of a past he had been running from. Marmush stopped under an old oak tree, staring at the path they used to walk together. You came? A voice sounded behind him. He turned around. Chloe. She looked calm, even confident. There was something unreadable in her eyes, and it made him uneasy. Told you. We need to finish this, she said, stepping closer. We already did. Marmush replied, looking her straight in the eyes. They lost everything. My business is back. The game is over. Chloe smiled faintly. Do you really think so? What do you mean? She pulled a phone from her pocket and handed it to Marmush. Watch this. The screen showed a video. The camera captured the same office room where his plan had unfolded minutes ago. But now, only Lydia was there. She spoke on the phone, her voice confident and cold. Yes, everything went perfectly. He believed it. Of course, I acted like I was panicking. He signed it. The plan worked flawlessly. In a few hours, everything will be registered to a shell company. And Marmush? He has no idea. The video ended. Marmush felt the ground shift beneath his feet. This is impossible, he whispered. I checked every document, every clause. Chloe looked at him with a mixture of sympathy and superiority. She knew you would suspect something. Knew you'd start digging deeper. She and Alex, just the tip of the iceberg. The real mastermind is someone else. Who? Someone who knew you better than anyone. Someone who knew how you think, how you'd act. Marmush felt a cold sweat on his back. You? Chloe took a few steps forward. At first, it was Lydia's idea. She wanted you, your business, your life. She dreamed of being in your place since high school. But she didn't know how. I did. After our divorce, I was left with nothing. And you know what's the funniest thing? I wasn't angry. I waited. But you trusted me with everything. When I offered help, you accepted it. We planned everything together, but you never thought I could go further. Lydia and I teamed up. Alex? Just a pawn. You thought you outsmarted us, but we just let you think that. Marmush stared at her, unable to believe his own ears. But why the show? Why all this? Because now we have everything. You signed the final document, thinking you were taking the business back. But you gave it to us. All assets, accounts, real estate. Now it all belongs to the company we control. She paused, gazing at his face. You lost, Marmush. This time, for good. His hands slowly dropped. He tried to remember every step, every signature. She couldn't be right. But everything was falling into place. The papers. The final contract. Her involvement in the plan. Is this the end? He asked quietly. Chloe smiled faintly. For you, yes. She turned and left, leaving him standing under the same oak tree where they once made future plans together. Now everything was shattered. Everything, except for one thing. The desire to take back what was his. Marmush watched her walk away, a barely noticeable smile appearing on his lips. Is the game over? No. It's just beginning. Marmush stood under the old oak, watching Chloe's figure fade away. Her words echoed in his ears. You lost, Marmush. This time, for good. Everything seemed meticulously planned. Every signature, every conversation, every trap. Lydia, Alex, and Chloe had played a brilliant game. But somehow, he didn't feel fully defeated. Not this time. Something new was growing inside him. Not just the desire to take back what was his, but the realization. This game had become personal, and he was going to change its rules. When he got in the car, his phone buzzed again. A message from Catherine. I heard what happened. I think you need help. Shall we meet? His heart skipped a beat. Catherine. He'd almost forgotten about her. She was the only person who had stayed by his side when everything started falling apart. She used to work as a financial consultant at his company. Smart, independent, with a sharp mind and a gaze that saw through people. She left the company after his wedding to Lydia, citing a desire to start a new project. But Marmush had always suspected there was more to it. He hadn't paid much attention then, but now everything made sense. The cafe on the rooftop of the old hotel was their favorite spot. They used to discuss company plans here, dream about expanding the business, and laugh at the ridiculous stories from clients. When Marmush walked in, Catherine was already waiting. In her usual dark blue dress, a cup of coffee in front of her. She looked up, and there was that same warmth in her eyes that he hadn't seen in a long time. You look worse than I expected, she smiled. But there was more concern in her voice than jest. Is that a compliment? He smiled back as he sat down across from her. More like an observation. She looked at him seriously. I know about Lydia and the rest. Of course you do. The city is small. No. Catherine took a sip of her coffee. I know more than you think. I've been following all of this for a while. Marmush narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? Do you remember why I left? She tilted her head to the side. It wasn't just a job. I knew Lydia was up to something. Her story didn't add up. But back then, you were blinded. I wanted to help, but I couldn't watch you dig your own grave. So you just ran away? No. Catherine became serious for the first time that evening. I started my own investigation and found more than I expected. She pulled a tablet from her bag and handed it to him. On the screen, a diagram of companies, accounts, and names. In the center, the name of the firm to which Lydia and Chloe had transferred his business. But what surprised him most was the name that appeared next to it, Ashley Moore. Who is this? Asked Marmush, flipping through the documents. Your ex-lawyer's wife. Do you remember David? The one who handled your first contracts? David, Marmush repeated thoughtfully. He suddenly left town 6 months ago. Because Ashley, his wife, had already made arrangements with Lydia. They created a shell company and started funneling assets. When David found out, he disappeared. And Ashley stayed to manage the process. Marmush examined the scheme carefully. Every step had been well thought out. Lydia, Chloe, Alex, and now Ashley. It was a large-scale conspiracy. And why are you showing me this now? Because I want to help you. I left back then because it was painful to watch you destroy yourself. But now I see that you're ready to fight. And I won't let these snakes take everything from you. Marmush lifted his eyes to Catherine. There was more in her gaze than just a desire to help. It was sincerity. And something else, something warm and familiar. He remembered how, a few years ago, when Lydia had just appeared in his life, Catherine had tried to warn him. He remembered that evening when they were alone in the office, talking about plans for the future, and a strange, sweet silence hung between them. He had wanted to say something but hadn't dared. And now she was sitting opposite, offering him a second chance. Are you sure? He asked softly. If you intervene, they might take more serious steps. I know, she smiled. But it's worth it. He looked at her smile. Real. Not like Lydia's. No falsehood, no plans. And then he suddenly realized. In this story of betrayals and intrigues, a new line was emerging. Pure. Real. The next day, Catherine and Marmush stood in front of the entrance to an elite club, where Lydia and her team were celebrating their victorious heist. In an hour, they were supposed to have negotiations with new investors, who, according to Catherine, were actually fronts through which they planned to funnel the last of the money. "Are you ready?" Catherine asked, touching his hand. "Always," he smiled. "But now, I'm not alone." He remembered her words, "This time, we'll do it together." And for the first time in a long while, he felt, this time, everything would be different. They entered the club, where Lydia, Chloe, and Alex were already waiting. The self-confidence still glowed in their eyes, but it would quickly fade, because now Catherine was in the game, and she and Marmush had a plan no one expected. The game was just beginning, but now, the stakes were much higher. And amidst all the liars and traitors, a real story was finally being born. A story of trust and love, emerging from the chaos of lies. The club was filled with an atmosphere of victory. Lydia, dressed in an elegant red dress, was laughing, holding a champagne glass. Alex stood next to her, showing his usual self-confidence. Chloe sat a little aside, but the smile never left her face. She knew they were on top now. Marmush and Catherine entered unnoticed. At first glance, it was clear. Their appearance was a surprise. Lydia paled for a moment, but quickly pulled herself together and slowly approached Marmush. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was cold, but her eyes sparkled with anxiety. "Came to see how you're celebrating a victory that's not yours," Marmush replied calmly, feeling Catherine's hand on his. Her light touch was like a reminder. They were in this together. "You do realize that it's all over?" Alex interrupted, his smile mocking. "The papers are signed. The business is no longer yours." "Really?" Marmush took out his phone and pressed a few buttons. "I wouldn't be so sure." Suddenly, the large screens in the club displayed a video. Lydia, Alex, Chloe, they were all sitting at a table, discussing how to deceive Marmush. The camera had captured every word. The room froze. "What is this circus?" Lydia turned to Alex, her face contorted with rage. "This wasn't supposed to happen." Alex shouted. "Oh, but this is just the beginning," Marmush smiled. "There's one more detail." And then Ashley, David's ex-lawyer's wife, walked into the room. Her appearance shocked everyone. "I think it's time to explain how you were planning to transfer the money through my company." Her voice was confident. Lydia looked as though she had just seen a ghost. "You were supposed to stay quiet." She screamed. "I never should have trusted you." "Really?" Ashley shrugged. "And you thought I'd settle for scraps when I could have it all?" It seemed like Lydia and Chloe's plan was falling apart right before their eyes. But the most interesting part was yet to come. "You used me too, Ashley?" Alex finally spoke up, his voice trembling. "Of course. You were just needed for cover." Her words echoed in the tense silence. Like everyone else, Marmush watched all this unfold and felt the situation slipping out of control. Catherine stepped closer, her voice calm but firm. "We need to go. It's about to explode." But just then, another confession rang out, making Marmush stop. "You think she's helping you selflessly?" Chloe looked straight at Marmush. "You think Catherine is just here like this? She's always wanted you. She knew that Lydia was planning to deceive you, but she waited for you to lose everything, to be there at the right moment." Marmush turned sharply to Catherine. "Is this true?" His voice was barely audible. Catherine looked him in the eye, confidently, calmly, but with a shadow of pain. "I really wanted to help. But yes, I've always loved you. I left then because I couldn't watch you destroy yourself over Lydia, and I knew I'd return one day, when you were ready to see the truth." Marmush stepped back. His gaze shifted between Catherine, Lydia, Chloe, and Ashley. Each of them was playing their own game. Who was telling the truth? Who was lying? And most importantly, who was really on his side? Lydia rushed to him, tears shining in her eyes. "Marmush, don't listen to them. They're all lying. I did it because I was afraid of losing you. I thought if I got the business, you'd stay. But now I see, it was a mistake. Come back to me. We'll fix everything." "Are you out of your mind?" Ashley stepped forward. "He'll never come back to you. Now, everything belongs to me. I control the accounts, and he'll stay with me, with or without the business. Enough, Catherine suddenly exclaimed loudly, making everyone fall silent. You all betrayed him, and I am the only one who didn't lie. Yes, I loved him. Yes, I wanted to be by his side. But I didn't take part in your dirty games. A dead silence fell over the room. Everyone looked at Marmush. His business, now in Ashley's hands. Lydia begged for a second chance. Chloe silently watched, as if knowing something no one else did. And Catherine stood nearby, honest or just a better player. Marmush slowly walked up to the table and picked up the folder with the final documents. He stared at it for a long time, then looked up. You all want something from me. Money, power, or something more. But you know what? I'm tired of playing your games. Suddenly, he pulled out his phone from his pocket, pressed a button, and all the screens in the room flickered to life again. This time, it was a live broadcast from the courtroom. The judge was announcing the verdict. As a result of the investigation, it was determined that the company, to which the assets were transferred, belongs to Marmush. All other transactions are declared invalid. Lydia dropped her glass, which shattered with a loud crash. Ashley stood frozen with her mouth open. Alex simply sat on the floor, staring into space. You thought I trusted you again? Marmush looked around. I just let you think I lost. Catherine stepped closer, her eyes shining. You knew everything? Almost everything. He briefly glanced at her. But who are you with now? Lydia suddenly asked, stepping closer. With me? With Catherine? With Chloe? Or maybe with Ashley? Each of us played our part. Each one was a part of your story. Marmush paused for a moment. He looked at each of them. Each had her own motives, her own secrets. The answer was simple, but he didn't give it. He just smiled and turned toward the exit, leaving them all behind. Catherine rushed after him. Lydia froze in place. Chloe looked on with a slight smile, and Ashley nervously flipped through the documents. Marmush stepped into the cool night. Ahead, the unknown. Behind, lies, betrayal, and victory. But who would he stay with? And what awaited him next? That remained a mystery. Who was really on Marmush's side? Catherine, who was ready to help, or Ashley, who used him on her way to victory?